Good jar. We're learning as Chutz Kafur Shlema Filan Chaya Baserach and Shira Bas Shalamis. We're on the two dots on Yud Gimel Amid Beis. Amar Rav Yehuda Breder of Chia. Shamati Shetfilas Etzba Mefageles Bechatas Pnimis. I heard that when the person dunks their finger into the dam of a chatas pnimis, we've talked. There's a lot of different types of chatois. We've learned a few of them. The par helm davar shel tziba, for example, is not a typical. The procedure for bringing it is not a typical procedure, and one of the elements, first of all, that it's the reason why it's called pnimis is because the dam goes inside the heichal, right? So, as we're going to see in the next block, the setup in the Beis Hamikdash was you had the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Outside of the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the heichal. That was where the menorah, the Mizbeach HaPnimi, the golden Mizbeach, which there was no shechita done on that Mizbeach. It was a small Mizbeach. Shulchan. That was all in the Pnimis, the heichal. After that was the Ulam. That was the area in between the Chotzer, the Azara, and the Heichel. And then you have the outside, the Chotzer, which contained the Mizbeach, where the general karbanos were brought. That's where they were spritzed on there. The dam was brought on there, and then they were burnt on top of it. But the Chatas had a slightly different. These chatois, some chatois have a slightly different procedure where the dam is brought inside into the heichal, and it requires, rather than like on a shlamim, which is where, as we're going to see, we learned out the din of zrika, that you spritz the dam using the kli sharis. You have shchita, you shech the animal, then kabbalah, the dam goes into the kli, then halacha, you bring the kli over to the mizbeach, and then you take the kli sharis with the dam in it and you spritz using the kli sharis. But the chatas pnimi, there's a separate element that you take the kli sharis and then you spritz with your finger. You dip your finger into the dam and use that in the heichal. So he said that this tefillah, that when you dip your finger into the dam, if a person has a machshavas pigel, which, like we said before, example, he has a machshava that I'm going to be makta the emurim, or I'm going to be zayrik. Well, here this is even before he says I'm going to be zayrik the dam. At this point, all he's doing is dipping in his finger. He said, I'm going to do that chutz l'zmanai. That's mefagel. That was what Rabbi Yehuda said he heard. Shama Ilfa. Ilfa heard this. Amr Kamei de Rapada, and he said it to Rapada. He relayed over this psak that this is going to be, you're going to be able to have pigel while doing this avodah. Amar klum lamanu pigel ela mishlamim. He said, where do we know b'chlal that such a thing as pigel? That if a person has a machsheves chutz l'zmanai while doing the avodas, that he's going to do part of the consumption of the carbon chutz l'zmanai. That's from Shlomim. That's where the pasuk of pigel is. That pasuk, which is the source of the pigel iser, that you get karas for it, that's by Shlom. Ma Shlom main tfilas etzem v'fageles ben, avchatas ain't tfilas etzem v'fageles ben. He said, if the whole source of where we know this chiyuv of pigel comes from Shlomim, and by Shlomim, certainly, if someone dips their finger into the dam and has a machshavas pigel at that time, that's going to be meaningless, because there is nothing that's at all an avoid about dipping your finger into the dam by Shlomim. By a Shlomim, you just take the kli and you throw the dam using the kli. There's no sticking your finger into the dam at all. So,
by the chatas, the zwika is with your finger.
Yes.
So it correlates.
first of all, we're not even talking about the zrika. We're going to get very into the nitty-gritty here. We're talking about just dipping the act of putting your finger into the dam.
Not for the point of Zrika, you're saying.
No, you're intending to do zrika afterwards, but is the point putting your finger into the dam? Not everything is an avodah, right? When you
Yeah, but the
say
Chattas, dipping your finger is the way of doing the Zrika, which is correlates to by
it's not.
Shlomo,
First of
is
all,
to
dipping your
start.
finger is not the zrika yet, right? It's maybe something on the path to the zrika. It's, as we're going to see, it's a prerequisite in order to do zrika, but you haven't gotten yet to zrika. So what exactly is it?
Okay, you're saying.
But in any case, the Gemara is saying that if the source doesn't have such a thing, if it doesn't have this action, this avoida, so you can't learn it out from Shlomim. Ma Shlomim ain't tfilas etzem fagalas, but avchatas ain't tfilas etzem fagalas behen. So it shouldn't be able to make a machshavas pigel by dipping your finger into the dam. Frak the Gemara, v'chi hakol mishlamim lamdu. Said the Gemara says, and this is what's bothering you, right? And by the way, the end is going to be exactly the way you want it to be.
No.
It's going to take a while till we get to it. There's going to be a few iterations that are different, subtle distinctions. But at this point, the Gemara is saying you have to learn it out, just like everything else. You learn things out directly. You have to find a similar thing by Shlomim, and you have to then apply it to. You say the same thing will apply also by Chatas. Now the Gemara is saying, lamdu. Is it true lamadnu? Are we going to really learn everything only from Shlomim? I'm going to prove to you, the Gemara is going to try to prove to you that there are things that we have by Chatas, there are things that are going to be chayav by Chatas that you're not going to be chayav by Shlomim. And it comes up with what will seem like a clever way, because when we'll get used to it, this is going to be a very common type of thought. Where it says, if someone by Shlomim has a machshava shaloi lishma, he does an avodah, let's say he does the shchita shaloi lishma, which is the first thing we had in Masechta Zevachim. We started off that if you do a carbon shaloi lishman, it's kosher v'le'ol b'al shem chayv. So if you have such a machshava, the carbon is still kosher. So ein moitzian midei pigel. It's not going to stop someone who had such a machshava and then he later has a machshavas pigel, he's going to be chayiv karas. The rule of pigel is a machshavas chutz l'zman. Pigel is a very stringent halacha that you get karas. It's not the same. There's no karas for shaloi l'shma or chutz l'mkaimeh. It's only on pigel. But one of the requirements in order to mechayiv pigel is that the rest of the carbon must have been brought appropriately. That means if the person did something else to passel the carbon, if he was a Baal Mum, and he did an avodah, so that would passel the carbon. Or he's Motzei he shechted the animal b'fnim, or he's not allowed. Whatever, any of the different ways of passing a carbon. If he passed the carbon and then he did machshavas pigel, the machshavas pigel is not going to work. And that's even if he passes the carbon, by the way, after he had the machshavas pigel. Everything else has to have played out that it would have been entirely kosher other than the pigel. So he says, if you do a shlom shaloi lishman, it's a kosher carbon. So therefore, if you have a machshavas pigel on it as well, the machshavas pigel will be able to take effect. Avchatas. So will you say avchatas shaloi lishma and motzei midei pigel? Are you going to say by chatas that if it was done shaloi lishma, then it's going to be able to have machshavas pigel? That shouldn't be true. That isn't true, because the chatas shaloi lishma is pasul, unlike a shlomim. So you ruined your carbon, and then he has machshavas pigel. At least the good side of it is he's not going to get karas for his pigel because he already ruined it with his shaloi lishma. So the Gemara is saying, don't tell me that. How could you tell me that everything is only what you have by shlomim? But we see that you could be chayiv for shlomim for pigel, and you're not going to be chayiv by chatas. Elamai, what are you going to have to say? the Gemara says a very generic answer. It's hard to, it's not very, it's very unspecific. It must be that it's not a limud where we say that chatas is learnt out from shlamim, but it's only exactly what was by shlamim is also going to apply by chatas. But rather, there must be that the pasuk is marba. There must be some unidentified pasuk that tells us that chatas is also going to have a din pigel, and therefore will tell you even in the cases where it won't necessarily apply by shlamim. So it could be that's also going to explain over here our original question about chatas hapnimi, the dipping the finger into the dam. Maybe that will also come from the miruya dekra that tells you learn out from shlam. Even though shlam doesn't have this chiyuv, this din that when you dip your finger in, it's going to be a avoida that the machshavas pigel will make you aser. The ribuya kra, this unidentified ribuya, will tell it to you. Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi said really the same. He went through the same exercise that we just said. Baliazu shamati. When I was in this upper story, I heard shetfilas etzba mefaleges. That on this original question, that the tfilas etzba is pigel. Shimon Lakish asked him, Klum lamanu pigel el mishlamim. He asked the question we just asked. Is there ever pigel? You only learn out from shlamim. Ma shlamim ein tfilas etzba mefageles. Just like since shlamim the tefillah is not mefagel, kohen av chatas ein tefillah etzba mefageles man. So to a chatas the tefillah, the dipping of your finger should not be mefagel. Like we said, you can't learn it out. So the Marbechol Viachiyakol Mishlam Lamanu Imasham Shalosh Mane Motzei Midei Pigol of Chata Shalei Lishma A Motzei Midei Pigol. Will we say that it would even apply to tell you that a Chatas, when he does it Shalei Lishma, he should still be Chayiv Pigol, just like the Shlamim? That can't be. So Amar Rabbi Yosef Reb Chanina in. He says not like we. So the answer is not like we said before. That it must be some unidentified pasuk. He says, "In hakol mishlam lamdu." We do learn it out from shlam. Hoyel, but he says, "I'll tell you what. There's a way to learn out specifically this case." You were asking, how's it going to be? We know that by chatas, if you have a machsheva shaloi lishma, that will make it that you're not going to pass. You're not going to be your machsheva's pigel is not going to make you a person chayav karas. He says, no, you could actually learn that out from shlomo as well. But how do we learn it out? It's true that machshavas shaloi lishma will not passel by a shlamim. But if you have a machshavas chutzlam kaimai, which is another way of passeling a carbon, it will passel your carbon. So and therefore will make it that you're not going to be able to have a chiyuv pickle. V'shaloi lishma paisel b'chatas, while machshavas shaloi lishma is what passels by a chatas. Ma chutzlam kaimai paisel b'shlam motzei midei figel. We'll be able to learn out. We say this. There are other things that are going to passel a shlamim, so we'll use that. Whatever it is that passel by shlamim will tell us that it's also going to passel in an equivalent situation by a chatas. Rav Yirmiyah says, "Mitzida tavra." You could that if you're going to say it's a limud that we're learning it directly from chutzlam kaimai. That you see by shlam machshavas chutzlam kaimai will make it that he's no longer subject to the din of pigel. You could ask a kasha on that. Ma'al chutzlam kaimai hapoisel b'shlam shchein noig b'chol hazvachim time b'shaloi l'shmoi she'ein noig alo b'pesav v'chatas. How could you learn out from shlamim that it has something that could pass by chutzlam kaimai? But chutzlam kaimai is much more strict. So maybe chutzlam kaimai is it's I shouldn't say more strict. It's more broad. It covers more ground. Everything is going to be possible if you do a chutzlam kaimai. So maybe that's the reason why by shlamim, when someone has a machshavas chutzlam kaimai, it's going to passel the carbon and make it that it's not subject to pigel. But how could that tell you by a chatas? Chatas and Pesach are the only two things that are passel lishma. Maybe that narrower psul will not also make it that it's not going to be subject to pigul. Elamai islach l'meimar. Elamai, what do you have to say? Davar hapoisel mehen moitzia midei pigul. Davar ma'akav me'eviyim l'dei pigul. Now we're finally getting to what's logical and what I think Luzzi was going for before. He says that each chatas, as opposed to shlamim, what we learn from shlamim to chatas is the general rules. The general rules are by shlamim. If you have something that passels the carbon, then it's no longer subject to pigul. It doesn't make a difference what specifically is that passels the carbon. And a corollary of that is also davar hama'akev behen evian l'dei pigul. And by shlamim, whatever is ma'akev in it is going to make it chayiv and pigul. If you have a machshavas chutz l'zmanai by anything that's ma'akev, that brings it l'dei pigul. We're finally going to now getting back. This is what we wanted in our original question of tfilas etzem fagelas. So hachanami davar apaisel ba moitzi midei pigul davar ma'akev mavil l'dei pigul. So therefore, that will answer our question about how do we learn out. How is it that you could have by chatas that when you have a machsheves shaloi l'shma, it's going to passel the carbon and make it that you could have a machsheves, it's no longer capable of having a machsheves pigul. Because we learn it out from shlamim, but we don't learn it out from shlamim as a direct limud. But we learn it out from shlamim in the sense that we say just like shlamim has the dinim of things that passel takes it out of pigul, so we're going to have the same din. It doesn't make a difference specifically what it is in each case that makes it passel. In the case of chatos, it becomes passel with machshavas shaloi l'shma. With the case of shlamim, it becomes passel when you have a machshava, let's say for 3 days later. But in the case of chatas, it will only be for a machshavas of 2 days, eating it 2 days later, because you can only eat a chatas for 1 day. So it doesn't make a difference what the specifics are. It tells us the general rule. But the Gemara then sticks in, and the general rule will also tell us that just like by shlamim, whatever is ma'akev, the 4 avoidis of shchita, kabbalah, elocha, and zrika, if any of those are done l'shem doing the zrika chutz l'zmanai, or any of the consumption of the carbon chutz l'zmanai, it's going to become pigul. So that will apply to, just like you have by shlamim, will apply to chatas as well, and will apply to chatas apnimis as well. And at this point, the Gemara is saying, so then dipping the finger,
is it davar apaisel or davar ma'akev? It's davar ma'akev.
I'm sorry.
The finger is.
The finger is a davar ma'akev, right? If you do it, you're not going to be able to spritz it. So it's gonna make it that it's going to be mefagel. This is going to be. It's an equivalent. We're just applying the rules. Will apply in each case as they make sense in each particular carbon.
But why is it a problem? Because dipping the finger is not part of the avoider. So what difference was?
So we're saying is that it doesn't. We don't learn out directly like if this is an avoider, that's an avoider. We're saying you're saying it's not part of the avoider, but it's necessary. It's if you can't do it, you can't spritz the dam obviously with your finger unless you. And the Torah does say you should put your finger in, as we're going to see. The Torah says v'tava v'lakach, different lashonis. But we'll get to that. But the chatois hapnimis, in order to spritz it, you have to do it. So we're saying we learn out from Shlomo that anything that is the Torah requires you to do that, and if you don't do it, you're not going to be able to yotze the mitzvah. That's considered to be a sufficient avodah that you're going to be at this point. That's what the Gemara is saying. That should be enough to have a chiyuv pigul if you have a machshavas pigul at that time.
The Torah says v'toivel, so that should be another mitzvah, another necessary step.
We're gonna declare about which step it will be considered. That's the Gemara is going to go into some depth about it. But at this point, the Gemara is sort of like leaving it broad. That since it's required, that should make it that you should be. The Gemara at this point thinks it should be. As we're going to see, let's go weiter because you're going to see that we're going to say in a second that it's going to be part of halacha. That it's when you dip your finger and you're about to move the dam, so it's going to be considered halacha. Amr of Mary says, Avana nami tnina. I can prove the same point from Mishnah. Ze'aklal. Kol ha-koimetz v'noisim b'kli. So, like we said, kmitza has its own translated series of avodas. So when you koimetz v'noisim b'kli, he takes the koimetz means he takes his fingers and he takes out some of the silas, and then he takes that silas and he puts it into klisharis. V'hamoilach, then he takes the klisharis, v'hamaktir, and then he takes the silas and burns it on the mizbeach. All of these are going to be considered, if you have a machshava to do a later consumption, it's going to be pigel. So it's like bishlam kaimet hainu shoichet. When he's taking the flour, that's the first thing you do with it. That's equivalent to shchita. You separate, just like you separate the dam from the behemoth, you're separating the kaimetz from the carbon. Moilech hainu moilech. Moilech is self-explanatory. Makdir nami, and also when you burn it, hainu zayrik. When you makdir, when you burn the flour, you're putting it on you're burning it on the mizbeach. That's the same thing as being zayrik the dam on the mizbeach. Elanoisim b'kli ma'niu. What are you doing when you put it into the kli? That's not Kabbalah. The Kabbalah, the Gemara is going to say, Ilay medami le Kabbalah. If you're going to want to say it's like Kabbalah, midami, is it the same as Kabbalah? Hasam mela hachiyu kashakal. By dam, the blood comes out on its own. Masha enkein, this over here, you're taking it out. So the Gemara is saying it's not. You can't say it's not sufficiently equivalent as far as your volition in this action. They're distinct, so you can't learn it out directly. So Gemara says, so Elamai, so we have to answer, since it's not enough that he doesn't do it, since it's, like we say, it's necessary, it's impossible for him to do the kmitza without, not to do the kmitza, to do the mincha without putting the flour into the kli. Al korchei avodah chashavihi, avodah chashuvi. That makes into avodah chashuva. Hachanami ki v'dolei sag deli avid le al korcha hainu halacha. So over there we're going to say. So it's going to be an avodah by the kaimitz when you put it into the kli. It's going to be, I think it's going to be halacha as well. I'm sorry, it's going to be Kabbalah. Even though it's not, we have a distinction between that and Kabbalah, but we're going to say through the fact that it's equivalent, like we said before, that there is a general translation of whatever we have by Shlomim, we're going to apply by anything else that's meshubed, anything else that's ma'akev, that's necessary to be done. And it's going to have to be translated into one of the avodas. So over there, it's going to be translated into Kabbalah. So too, putting your finger into the dam by a chatois pnimis is going to have to be ha'ilach. That's we reject the premise. La'olam the dami l'Kabbalah. Really, it's not halacha. By the mincha. It's not that because it's ma'akev, therefore it must perforce become a avodah. It's really just similar enough to Kabbalah. Well, how you said that the difference because one he has to do it and the other one happens at home. Since in either case it's being put into a kli, mali mela mali kashakal v'yav. That's not like my father used to say, my father was from, it's a distinction without a difference. It does. It's true they're different, but it's not enough to make it not the normal Kabbalah. So you can't prove anything from there. Let me see. Let's talk Gemara. Lema katanoi. So the Gemara suggests maybe this is like a machloikas tanoim. That means this question about whether putting your finger into the dam by echatas pnimis, let's say it's a machloikas tanoim, or whether it's considered to be halach. The Tani Chada Tfilas, we have one brisa that says Tfilas etza mefageles bechatas. One Manda Omer says that Tfilas says mefageles bechatas. So that seems to tell you that it is a avoid of halacha, and therefore you could have a machshavas pigel. Tani idach loy mefageles v'loy mispageles. First of all, it's not going to be mefageles if a person has the machshava about it. That means if he at the time he did it, he has in mind the machshavas pigel, it's not going to become pigel. V'loy mispageles. That means if a person has in mind to do this, to dip his finger in while he's doing something else, which bichlal is not, because it's not consumption of the carbon, but it just, I guess, larav chadimos. I guess when we get to the Mishnah, we'll see what that means. But in any case, my love tanoihi. So isn't this l'chayr to say this machlokes is exactly what we were talking about, whether it's considered to be avoid of halacha or not? So Gemara loy harabon harab shim. No, this is the machlokes that we have a machlokes in our Mishnah, right? We said that Rav Shimon said that a Mishnah that you can't be mechoyev pigel for halacha, since halacha can be dispensed with. If person is standing near where the mizbeach is and he just spritzes directly from the behema onto the how does it work? No, I'm sorry. If he spritzes into the kli and then he's standing already where he needs to spritz from the kli onto the mizbeach, so there's no need for halacha. So anything that's not needed is not going to be mefagel. So the Gemara says when we said tfilas etzba loy mefageles, that's according to Rav Shimon, who says even though even though maybe it is halacha, but there's no need for halacha here. So Gemara Rav Shimon, ma'ir your tfilas etzba. What do you have to talk about tfilas etzba? We have a second machlokes Rav Shimon, and this whole thing would be moot. He holds in general that you don't have a din of pigel on anything. The only pigel is only like by the shlum. The shlum is by the mizbeach chitzon. Mizbeach hapnimi in general is not subject to the iser, to the chorus of pigel. Elahav harabanan. So it all has to be in the rabbanan because Reb Shimon is precluded from discussing pigel by pnimis. But at least at this point, we're going to come back to Reb Shimon being able to. We very cleverly, in these two brises, did not mention what type of chatas. We just said chatas in general chatas. But there's a difference between chatas achitzonis. Chatas achitzonis is the one that has a tefillah be'etzba, and the chatas hapnimis, so when you can't by the chatas hapnimis, itaka can't. It says he has to be toval etzboi badam. So it says the gabi lechadas hachitzonis v'lokach hakoy midam hachadas be'etzav v'nosal kanusam zebechayla. It says v'lokach. So we say that the v'lokach doesn't mean the dipping; it's talking about the mekabel the dam. So that which he has to dip his finger in is not being dictated by the pasuk. It just in order to be able to be zayrik, he has to put his finger in. But the Torah makes no reference to it where it says v'lokach. Where the Torah says v'taval etzboi, that is takan avoida, and that's going to be an avodah that the Torah is going to require you to, if you have a machshavas pigul, he's going to be chai. Sagt die Gemara, chatos hachitzayin is pshita. This is pashut. The Torah doesn't say b'chatois hapnimis like zibu v'tavel. It doesn't say v'tavel. There's no direct mitzvah to be tovel. So what do we have to tell me that there's not going to be a pigul on it? So the Gemara itzrich. Since the Torah says he has to actually put his finger, he has to get the dam. The asi kaif ramilhu ayade. If a monkey came, that's what a kaif is, and he put the dam on the kohen's finger, boy lemishkol zim nachrit, he'd have to redo it. Even though we're saying that the Torah did not make a chiyuv on him to do it, but still, in the end, he has to have one have done it. If anyone else did it, that would interfere with the avodah.
Didn't the Torah say v'toivel?
What?
Didn't the pasuk says v'toivel?
No, it says on him v'lokach. The taval is by the pnimis, and that's taka. He's mechayiv to do it. But the Gemara is saying, so what's the chiddush if it just says v'lokach, and we interpret v'lokach to mean that he has to be mekabel the dam in the kli sharis? It has nothing to do with putting his finger into it, as we're going to see later on. So the Gemara is saying, like, what's the hava mean? Obviously, it's not an avodah. It's just necessary, but it's not something you were commanded to do. So, and Gemara's answer is, since if it happened through some, if Elon Musk got his Optimus robot to come put the dam on your finger, that would be the modern version of this Gemara. Instead of saying that a monkey came and put it on his finger, he'd have to redo it, even though the Torah didn't say to do it. But you'd have to redo it because then you'd have an outside force getting involved. It's as if it says v'tavel. I might say that it's as if kamash malon that we're splitting the difference. That to some extent it's true. The Torah says it doesn't say, it says v'lokach, but the lokach does mean it. That since the Torah said Kabbalah in the lashon of a lokach, so there's some mashmois that he has to do it. So all it means is that he has to be the one who ends up doing it, but it can't be done by an outside force. But from the fact that the Torah didn't say v'tavel, that tells you that it's not the same thing as if he was required to do it. It's not going to be avodah that it's going to make him chayiv if he does pigul at the time of the dipping of his finger. Okay, we'll stop over here.
What time? 6:30?